Do that. Why isn't it letting me? Okay, there you go, Bianca.
Awesome, thanks so much. Hello, everybody. I'm not gonna repeat too much what Ashley was just mentioning, but wanted to thank everyone for joining us on this fine Tuesday evening for another Michael's Virtual Classroom. My name is Bianca from yarnspirations.com. I'm here with your wonderful host today, Tamara Kelly from Moogly Blog. This evening, Tamara is going to teach us how to create a really beautiful and squishy throw using just your hands and Bernat Blanket Big yarn. So no crochet hooks or needles required for this project. I will be in the chat helping you guys answer any questions you may have. So say hello, tell us where you're joining from, and feel free to kind of ask any questions. And with all of that being said, I'll pass it over to Tamara to get started.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Tamara from Moogly, and as everybody said, thank you so much for joining us tonight. So this is what we're making. This is a blanket made with Bernat Blanket Big, which is the biggest, thickest Bernat blanket that you can get on the market today. This is made with just my hands. That's all I use. We do use a couple other little tools when it comes time to draining yarn, but for the actual crocheting, it's all done just with our hands. So normally, if you were to use this yarn with a crochet hook, you'd need a 25mm hook, but we're going to be using our hands today, so you don't have to use one of those. I am also going to be going over a little bit about gauge, what that is, and also how to join your yarn ends together. Those are the two questions I always get a bunch of, so I will be sure to cover those today. But we're going to be using Bernat Blanket Big. I've got a couple skeins of it right here. You can get, this one is sold at your local Michael's right there. And it's also part of the Stitch and Win going on right now at Michael's. So I would look for the ones with a special Stitch and Win label, because you can win cash prizes and Michael's gift cards in these skeins. There's a special code. But there's lots of other colors beautiful from Bernat Big as well. And also right now, I just wanted to point out, I don't know how long it will be out, but Bernat Blanket Big Bold is another option right now during Stitch and Win. This one's a little messy because I took the label off at one point to show off the yarn, but you can see it's just another gorgeous variety of the Bernat Blanket Big that you can use to make this pattern. So with all that said, let's go ahead. I'm going to bring in the hand camera and we can take a closer look at this blanket together. All right, so let's go ahead. There we go. All right. So thanks, everybody. I love seeing where everybody's tuning in from. So thanks for putting that in the chat. So here is a closer look at the finished blanket. So if you're familiar with crochet, you might be able to see the individual single crochet stitches. And you can see with my hands here for comparison just how big these are. So we're going to be using our fingers to make the loops rather than a hook. Now, everybody's hands are going to be a slightly different size. So that means the gauge, which means the size of your stitches. It's a fancy crochet word. Basically, it just means the size of your stitches. Everyone's gauge is going to be just a little bit different because everybody's hands are a little bit different. Everybody's hands are just going to be a little bit different size. And you should make the loops in the way that's most comfortable for you. So that might take some experimentation. You might find it easier to go around 2 fingers or 3 fingers, or even use your whole hand. The more fingers you use and the bigger those loops, the looser your fabric is going to be. If you use fewer fingers and keep those loops a little tighter, you're going to have smaller stitches. So you can affect the look of your loops as you're crocheting. And one other thing I want to say right up front is this does take practice. If this is the first time you've crocheted or the first time you've crocheted using just your hands, it can take some practice to get even same sized loops so that your stitches all look even. Exactly the same as if you were learning how to crochet with a hook. I would say it's the same thing. It would be lovely if it was one of those things you could just do right off the bat, but it does take practice. So let's go ahead and move that to the side here and pull in our yarn. Here we go. If you've got the extra instead of the big, I do recommend that you try and hold a couple of those strands together. But if that doesn't work, you can definitely practice with just one strand of the extra. Extra thick is also a good option. Bernat Blanket Extra Thick would work very well for this pattern. And like I say, if you weren't able to get the extra thick yarn, you can just kind of hold a couple strands of smaller yarn together to kind of get that effect. So right now I'm just go ahead and I pulled a bunch off my skein because we're going to go through it relatively quickly since it's such a thick yarn. So before I actually get started with the hand crocheting, not knitting, but hand crocheting, are there any questions I can answer? So Bianca, if you could help me out with that.
So I think we're just looking for some clarity on whether we're crocheting or knitting today. Is this?
This will be hand crocheting. With hand knitting, you have a lot of active loops. So it's often referred to as arm knitting. And typically you'd have a bunch of stitches across your arm. This is going to be hand crochet. We're making just one stitch at a time. So the nice thing about this technique as opposed to arm knitting is you don't get stuck in it. If you have to put it down and run to the bathroom or take care of your kids, you can put it down without being stuck inside your project. So let's go ahead and get started here. I've got the end of my yarn and I'm going to come in about a foot. Now, normally when I'm teaching people how to crochet, I say come in about 6 inches, but this stuff is so big and thick, I want to come in quite a bit further. It's just going to, each stitch is just going to take up that much more yarn. And the first thing we're going to do is we need to make a slip knot. So again, if you are familiar with a slip knot from crocheting or knitting standard methods or other techniques, it's the same slip knot you would make. If not, we'll go ahead and make it here together and we'll do it a couple times. So I've got my end right here on my right. I just want to make sure you know that's because it's going to go off camera here for a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a loop with my yarn. So I'm just going to literally bring that end over. So you can see now how it kind of looks like an awareness ribbon. Great question from Jackie here that just popped up. Do you want us to pull from the middle or take the outer paper off? I would recommend taking the outer paper off for this one. You will have to kind of put it down maybe on the floor or in a basket next to you because it is just that big skein. But I recommend pulling from the outside for this one. When you've got a really fuzzy yarn like this, pulling from the inside can really add a lot of stress to the yarn. It's going to really just rub against itself as it pulls out, and it's going to add a lot of tension, and it just increases the risk of tangles and breaks. So for this one, I would say go ahead and pull from the outside. So right there, we've got our loop in our yarn. I'm going to do that one more time. Got the yarn out straight. There's my little end, and I just loop it over. So it looks like our little awareness ribbon there. Now what I want to do is I want to take the end and I want to slide it under that loop right there. So we can see that right there peeking out in the middle of our loop. So finally what we want to do is reach in there and grab that little piece of yarn, the tail that's underneath. So there it is. We're going to grab that tail. And then with our other hand, we'll grab the end that's attached to our skein and that cut end. And we're just going to pull here gently in opposite directions. And that will pull our slip knot together. And there we have a slip knot. What makes it a slip knot? Well, it's adjustable. By pulling on that end gently, we can adjust the size of that knot. And also, if we don't like it, we made it too small, too big for whatever reason, we can just pull on that end and it goes away. All gone. So now we can do it together one more time. Got the end of my yarn. I'm going to come in about a foot or so. I'm going to just loop it right over, just like that. Like I say, to me, it always looks kind of like maybe the curlicue on top of a Hostess cupcake or a little awareness ribbon there that we're used to seeing now. We just got that yarn looped right over. Then we take this end here and slide it right behind or underneath the loop we made. Okay, so you can see the tail end still over here. It kind of looks like it's got a little cross through it there. You can see that at tail end underneath. We reach right into that loop to grab that tail end. So you can see now our fingers are in there. It's holding it in place. So we can take our other hand and grab the tail end of the yarn and the end attached to the skein. Sometimes I'll refer to this portion as the working yarn. And then we just pull gently until that knot closes right up, just like so. Alrighty, there we go. So now we've got our slip knot made. So what you want to do now, I showed you how that was adjustable. You can pull on those ends a little bit to adjust the size of that knot as needed. We want that knot to be, for now, and again, you can play with this and see what's comfortable for you, but I would adjust it to be about the size for 3 of my fingers to fit comfortably inside. So you can go ahead and pull on that knot a little bit. If it's really too small, take it out and try again to make a bigger one. And we just want to make sure that we can get all 3 fingers in there. If it's really uncomfortable for you, go ahead and put 4 in there. If this, or 2, whatever's most comfortable for you. This is being recorded and it should be up on the Michael's YouTube channel, usually within 24, sometimes 48 hours. So I've got my fingers in that loop, and now what we're ready to do is start chaining. This is the yarn end that's attached to my skein. The end that's here is cut. The tail end, that's just going to hang out for now. We'll take care of that all later. So what I want to do is I want to take the end that's attached to the skein, the working yarn, and I'm going to do what's called a yarn over. And what that means is I'm going to bring it up and over the ends of my fingers. So if you've crocheted before with a hook, it's the exact same motion you would do with your crochet hook. We're just doing it with our hands now instead. So let's do that again. We've got the slip knot on our hook. I'm going to maybe push it back a little bit further if I need a little bit more room. And then I want to take the yarn and go up and over the top of my fingers towards me. Then what I'm going to do is, using the ends here of my fingers, I'm going to use them as the hook, and I'm going to grab this yarn and pull it through this loop. When I do that, that's going to create a new loop with this yarn on my fingers. So let's see how that works. I'm going to use my other hand to help, because we're doing this all with our hands here. You see I just grab that yarn and I pull it right up and through. And now I've made a loop that's the size of my fingers again. There we are. And we have made 1 chain, because we don't count the loop that's on our hands when we're crocheting, or on our hook, whatever the case may be. We just count the one that we've worked off of our hands. So that V right there, that V shape you can see, that is 1 chain. Now, if we don't like our chain, it doesn't look right, just like our slip knot, we can very gently pull that right back out. So now we're back down to our slip knot, and we can do it together again. So we get our 3 fingers back in our slip knot, push them back a little further if you need the room. We want to yarn over with our yarn, so bring it up and over our fingers. And then we can just use your thumb in there, however is comfortable for you, grab that yarn and just pull it up and through. And you want to do your best to kind of keep it straight. So you can see here our working yarn that's attached to our skein, how it's in front of my fingers still as I pulled it through. So that if I pulled on that side of the loop, it would come up through and get bigger. Or if I pull down, it will get smaller. That's what we want to do. We want to try and keep our loops really straight. It will keep our work straighter. If you really struggle with that, that's okay. You can keep going. But as you practice, that's something to work on. So we've got 1 chain made here. This is what the underside looks like. So on the back of our chain, we've got sort of 1 loop there in the middle. And from the top of our chain, we've got that V shape right there with our slip knot right there at the bottom. So now we're ready to continue chaining. And the number of chains you make will determine the width of your blanket. So if you wanted to make a blanket, for instance, that was 36 inches wide, you would want to make a chain of approximately 17. But that's my gauge with my hands. So what I recommend you do for this yarn is that you make a chain just a little bit wider than the blanket you want to make, and then I'll show you how to come back and work the following rows. So to continue chaining, we yarn over again. We take our working yarn and bring it up over our fingers towards us, and then just grab it again and pull it right up through that loop. And hopefully there you can see how I'm keeping that working yarn in front of my hand, not behind it, but I want it to be the loop in front. Even though this is really all 1 loop, it can be a little confusing if you're new to it. This is all 1 loop, but we refer to this part here in front of my hand and the part in the back of my hand. So I want this front part to be the part that's attached to the skein. So now we have made 2 chains. And you can see how that second chain, that V right there, just nests down into the V that we made for our first chain. All right, so then we can keep going. So at this point, you can chain however many you would like to determine the width of your blanket. We would want to chain the width of our blanket plus 1 extra chain, and I'll explain that here in a moment. But let's do a couple more together. I'm going to yarn over with the yarn and just pull that loop up and through. Okay, so if you feel like, oh, I've pulled it through and oh my gosh, look how big and sloppy it is. Not a big deal. We just get our hand in there and pull right back down on that yarn. If it's really tight, pull up on it a little bit. We just want to make it so that these chains that we're making are all about the same size and so that they're comfortable on our fingers. So we yarn over, grab that yarn and pull one up and through. Let's do one more, and then I think I'm going to have to pull up some more yarn from my skein here. So we yarn over, just grab that loop and pull it up and through. So now, if I lay out my little chain here, we can count. I've made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chains. Okay? So if I flip it over and we look at the back of that row of chains, now what we have is this little row of humps. On the top, we've got the V. On the back, we've got these little humps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, we don't count the one that would be on our hand or on our hook. It is the working loop. It is not considered a finished chain yet. So we are going to be working back into these loops to make our row 1. But before I do that, I wanted to ask if there were any questions or anything I needed to go over before we moved on to the rest of row 1.
I think, well, looking at everybody's cameras, they're just stitching along here.
Okay.
Look like, yeah, there's many questions popping out in the chat.
I'm sorry?
Oh, it doesn't look like there's many questions popping.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry. I saw a few things flying by about the yarn, but it's hard to read and stitch all at the same time. So, okay. Is it bad to make it tight? If it is too tight, you're not going to be able to get your fingers back in there. We have to go back into those loops to make more stitches. So that's why I say it's kind of takes some practice to make the loops big enough so that they're big, but they're not too big. So if I flip it over here, this is what it should look like on top of the chain. This is what it'll look like on the back of the chain. If you have a thinner yarn, it's going to be a lot looser and floppier, which is why I recommend, trying to get a bigger yarn if you can. If you have a much thinner yarn, you can try doing this with just 1 or 2 fingers instead. That might help quite a bit too. So now we've got our chain made and we're ready to make our first row. We're going to be making single crochets. It is one of the most basic stitches in crochet other than chaining itself. So that's the skill we're going to be building onto. One thing that we need to think about, and the reason I said you make the number of chains that you want to have for the width of your blanket plus 1 more, I'll pull this yarn out of the way a little bit here so it's a little easier to see, is that 1 more is going to be what we call a turning chain. Basically, it acts as a little ladder that's going to lift us up to the level that we want to go across for that row. So it's the little ladder that gets us up to the height for row 1. And yes, the video will be recorded and on the Michael's YouTube channel. So let's go ahead and get our fingers back in that loop, okay? And go ahead and take the time and adjust it so it's about 3 fingers or so, or whatever's comfortable for you with your yarn. Again, if you're using a much thinner yarn, you might be a lot more comfortable with just 1 or 2 fingers. And now what I want to do is I want to be working into those back humps of the chain. Now, that said, if this all kind of looks like a mess to you, if you haven't crocheted before and you're having trouble reading your stitches, that is totally fine. What you can do is just work into the part that is easiest for you to grab. Try and find a loop that makes sense for you. Try and make it consistent. With crochet, the great thing is, you can just keep practicing it and refine it later on. Right now, we're working on these motions. So I'm going to use this first stitch, or that last chain we made, the very last one we made, that's going to be our little ladder. So we want to skip over it and come to the chain previous, the one we made right before that. So I'm going to flip it over. So now I've got that row of humps. To me, these look like little Loch Ness Monster humps. Maybe that will help you visualize it too. That's what I always look for. I look for like that little Loch Ness Monster humps. So we know we've got 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We want to skip the one that's closest to our hand. So this is the one that we're going to be going into right here. Again, if you can't read your stitches yet, if you're very new at this, just try and grab a piece of yarn approximately a stitch away from your hand. Okay, I'm going to tighten up that loop just a little bit there. It got loose while I was chatting. Then I want to find that loop that I want to go into. I'm going to use my other hand to grab that out and hold it up for me. And then I'm going to keeping the loop, the working loop on our hand here. We're going to also stick those fingers into that loop of the chain. Okay, so the chain is just hanging off my hand now. I've got the working loop, and this is the loop of that chain. Again, if you can't read your stitches yet, just try and grab a loop nearby there. Then we need to come back to our working yarn here and take our time and get that straightened out. I'm going to push both of these loops back here on my hand a little bit, and I want to take our working yarn, the end attached to the skein, and I want to yarn over again. The exact same motion we did before. We bring that yarn up and over our fingers towards us. Okay, then we are going to grab that yarn with our little ends of our fingers here between the fingers, if that works. If you don't want to try and get your thumb in there, however it works. And we're just going to pull that loop of the yarn just up through that stitch. So now it makes a loop on our hand, just like before when we were chaining. But now we went down into that chain and pulled up a loop. So now we have 2 loops on our hand. So to finish the stitch, and don't worry, I'll be doing that again, but to finish the stitch, we've got 2 loops on our hand, we yarn over again, and now we pull this loop through both of these loops. And when we do that and pull up this loop, we now have our first single crochet. That right there is the very first single crochet. So that's what it looks like from the front. It's got 2 little legs there. If we look at it from the top, we see another V. And that's what the tops of all our stitches are going to look like now. So I'm going to go ahead, and normally then I would put this loop back on my hook and continue across on the chains. But I'm going to, for now, I want to pull this one back out so I can demo that again. If your chain only has 7 chains, that's fine. However many you made at this point, we're just kind of learning the motions. Like I said, I think everybody's going to have their own size of blanket they want to make. So right now we're just kind of learning the technique. So I've got that loop back on my hand, and I've got my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches. That last one wants to hide a little bit behind our yarn there. I want to skip the one closest to my hand and come to the next one. So then I keep those loops, that loop on my hand. Move that yarn out of the way here. Pick whichever loop I want to go into for my stitch. Put that loop also over my hand. There we are. And then I yarn over with the yarn, pull it up through the chain. So now we have 2 loops on our hand again. And it's okay to go ahead and take some time and adjust the size of those loops. We don't want them too big and loose. There we are. Then we yarn over again, come from the back, up and over our fingers, and this time pull it through both of those loops. So now you've made 1 single crochet, and you're back to having 1 working loop on your hand. So we don't want to go through the chain that was closest to our hand. We want to go to the one after that, because that one that was closest to our hand is the turning chain, or the little ladder that gives us the height for our row. If we didn't skip that one, we'd have a real pinchy start to our row, because we wouldn't have that ladder to come up. Alrighty, so we've got our first single crochet made. I'm going to adjust the size of my loop on my hand here, make sure it's nice and secure and feels about 3 fingers big. And then we want to come back and take another look at our chain. So let's take our time and look at our chain. We should have 3 chains left here. 1, 2, 2, and 3. Glancing back and forth between the monitor and the yarn. So we just worked into this one here. So if we follow that line right down, you can see this is the next one in line. So we take the loop that's on our hand, go under the chain loop there, stick our hand right in the middle of the chain, take our working yarn, yarn over, pull that loop through just the chain loop, adjust your loop size again with 2 loops on your hand, then we yarn over and pull that through both of those loops. There we are. So now we have 2 single crochets made. So then we just continue on across. Now, like I said, if you are very new to crochet, these things may be very difficult for you to see, seeing these V's and this bumps. That's why I say kind of find that next loop, if you can find the next loop to practice these motions in now. Genuinely reading your crochet stitches, by which we mean looking at the yarn, looking at the stitches you've made and being able to say, ah, this is the top, this is the bottom, this is this loop, this is that loop. Seriously, this is one of those things that just takes time. It is one of those skills that the more you do it, the more you make the stitches, the more you practice, the more even they will be, the straighter they will be, the flatter straighter your chains will lie, the more even your stitches will be, the better and more even they'll look, and the easier they will become to read. This is, like I say, this is just one of those skills that genuinely just take time to practice. So since we're about halfway through, I want to keep going here so I can keep showing all the other things you need. As we've said a couple times, this is being recorded, so you can catch it on the Michaels YouTube channel within 48 hours. And I have actually taught this class for Michaels a couple other times. So you may want to go back and watch one of those as well. That might be just the way I was teaching it that way, or just the angle, or maybe something I said might help it make sense, whereas this one isn't for some reason. So we've got 2 chains left here. You can see, let's really look. This is the one I worked around last. So if we just follow that line down here, here's the next one. I've got my loop on my hand. I'm going to stick my hand just right through that hole. If I pull up that loop, makes this hole there in the chain, and I can just put my fingers right in that hole. Okay. Then we take our working yarn, bring it up over our hand, pull it just up through that chain, make a nice loop there. So now we've got 2 loops on our hand, yarn over, and pull through both those loops to finish. There we are. So we've got 1 left. We should have 1 chain now. Well, I do. Again, depends how many you've made, and it's okay if it looks like a mess. Genuinely, I so wish now, if I'd had the foresight, I wish I would have kept my first few crochet projects so I could show people it was genuinely a mess as well. Just keep practicing the motions and it will start to make sense here. So we've got our last chain right there. There's the top of it with that little V. There's the bottom of it with the little hump. And here is our slip knot. So we find that last little loop. Again, if you don't think it's the right loop, that's okay. Just grab a part of that stitch. Get your fingers in there. This one might be a little tight because of the slip knot, and that's okay. There we are. And then we yarn over and pull up just through that chain. You can definitely use your other hand to help you. I've done this a lot, which is why, I'm probably making it look a little easy, but it's took me a while. Even though I was an experienced crocheter, it still took me a while to get used to crocheting by hand. So we've got our 2 loops. We yarn over and pull through those last 2 loops. There we go. So this is what it should look like. And you can see it's kind of a mess. And then I give it a tug. I love doing that. I just give it a little tug, a little sort of straighten it out a little there. And then to my experienced eye, my stitches do make more sense. Again, I totally understand if you've not crocheted before, this is kind of going to look like a jumble. But what I want you to look for is if we turn over our work here, so that we're looking at it from the top, I'm going to turn it this way so it's a little easier to see. We've got those V's again. There's 2 loops there, that very first one making a V. there we've got another V kind of going down to that V, another V going down into that V, the V at the top of the last stitch we made, and then our working loop is coming right out of the center of that last V. So we have our first row of single crochets. It's exactly 4 stitches, a very tiny blanket. But that's why I say when you want to decide how wide you want to make your blanket, you can just use your hands to chain out that width plus 1 extra loop for our little turning chain. So now it is time to make row 2. And row 2 is going to be exactly the same as row 3, row 4, row 5, etc., etc. They're all the same from here on out. The first thing we need to do, though, is we need to make another ladder. We need to go up another level for row 2. So let's go ahead and make another chain. This is the exact same chain that we were making at the beginning. We can stop now in the middle of our project and make another one. And that's what we do to make our turning chain. So we yarn over with our yarn and pull that loop up and through. And now we have just a chain hanging out right there on top of our row. Let me pull up a little bit more yarn from my skein here. And I did want to mention while I'm pulling up my yarn here, I saw somebody mention, and I always, yes, this is a great tip. When you watch the recording, use the gear icon on YouTube and you can slow down and speed up the video. So it's just right for you exactly at the speed you need. So we've got our chain 1 made here, but to work back across these stitches, we need to flip it over. So I want you to turn it like it's the page of a book. If you're right-handed, you're going forward in the book. If you're left-handed, you'll be turning back in the book. So grab your work as if it was the page of a book and just flip it over. Keep your hand in that loop though, and pull your working yarn back up here out of the way. There we go. So now we're looking at the back side of our first row. But if we look at the top, we still see those 2 loops. So from the back, what I want you to look for is that little cave right there under that loop at the top. You see that dark little cave right there? That's where we're going to be going for our stitches. And there should be one underneath those top 2 loops of each of those stitches. So we've got our turning chain here. This is the last stitch we made in the first row. There's those 2 loops at the top of the stitch. You can see that little cave, that little dark spot right there. If I pull it apart, you can actually see the table in between. So that's where we're going to go in for these stitches. We want to go under those top 2 loops. So you put your hand right in there now under those 2 loops. So you can really push that back on your hand if you need to. I've got the working loop right here and the 2 loops at the top of that stitch. And then same thing. I grab that working yarn, pull it up and over my fingers for a yarn over. And now I'm going to pull this loop underneath both of these 2 loops right here. So not that one, but the 2 loops of the actual stitch. So we just pull that right up and through the stitch. Now we've got 2 loops on our hand again. And just as before, to finish our single crochet, we yarn over and pull through those 2 loops. There we are. So now we have our first single crochet for row 2. Got those 2 little legs there in front, and we've got that V at the top, right there. So now we can come to the next stitch. So we worked this stitch here. Now we go to the next one. We look for that little cave again. We can flip it over and find those 2 loops at the top and find that little space there right underneath. And that's where we insert our hand. And then we can yarn over, pull that loop underneath those 2 loops, pull it up nice and high so it's comfortable. This yarn is really textured, so we just pull that up. So no, going from row 2 to row 3 is not a different process. We've only done 1 row. We're on row 2 right now. Row 1 is done. This is row 2. Rows 3, 4, 5, etc. are all going to be the same as row 2, what we're doing right now. So I've got 2 loops on my hook, and I yarn over and I pull through. There we are. We find the next stitch. Look for those 2 loops on top of the stitch. Look for that little cave underneath there. Insert your fingers in there. Pull that yarn up and over your fingers. Pull it underneath the loops for the stitch. Pull that loop up nice and high. And yarn over and pull through those 2 loops. There we are. So now we are at the end of the row. There we are. So then we insert our hand just under those top 2 loops of the last stitch. Yarn over. Pull that up through the stitch. And yarn over and pull through those 2 loops right there. There we are. So now we have made 2 rows of crochet. It can be a little confusing. That initial chain doesn't actually count as a row. It counts as the beginning of our first row. But so yes, the process is different, but it's the same motions. It's just to make the first row, we have to work back into that foundation chain or those chains we made. To make the second row and every row after that, we're just working into the top of the previous row. So for row 3, we'd be working across the top of row 2. For row 4, we'd be working across the top of row 3. But we're always going under those 2 loops at the top. We always want to make sure that we make our little ladder, our turning chain. So we chain 1, and then we always want to, and the reason I say to turn it like a book page is because you want to be consistent. If you flip it back and forth different directions, your edges are going to get a little wonky. So just turn it over again. And then we're ready to work back here for row 3. So we can find that one's really easy to spot there today. It wants to be nice and dark. That little cave there, we can check it. It's right underneath those 2 loops. So we know that's the right spot to go into to start row 3. Get our hand in there, yarn over, pull up through those 2 loops, just the exact same thing we were doing for row 2. So yes, going from the chain to row 1, unfortunately, is one of the most difficult things, and it's right up front. I wish somehow we could put that at the end when you've got these stitches down, but unfortunately, it's just not the way it goes. But we just continue making those single crochets just as we did before, back and forth in rows. So when I said you make the number of chains for the width of your blanket, that's what helps you determine the width. Then you keep adding rows, and that will give you the length. So that is really the easiest way to determine the size of your blanket. And yes, you never work back into that turning chain. That little ladder is just right along the edge there. It doesn't get worked back into. Same thing for that very last chain you make when you're making your starting chain. You want to skip that very last one you make and start working back into the chain after that so that it creates that little ladder. If you wanted to use a crochet hook instead of your fingers, just saw that one pop up, you would need a 25mm hook. A US 50 shown right here. This one is by Susan Bates. The stitches that you get with the crochet hook are a little bit smaller than your fingers because, well, you know, as you can see, it's just plain smaller than using a bunch of fingers. So you will get a tighter blanket if you prefer to use a crochet hook. It's absolutely something you can do. Very easy to crochet with. I'll go ahead and take a stitch here for those who want to see that. And doing it with a hook instead of a hand. We have the loop on our hook. We find that same little cave, go in there with the hook. Got our 2 loops on top there, plus our working loop. Same thing, we want to yarn over, bring it from the back over our hook. Use the hook to pull it up under those loops. Then we have to give a little tug again. Make sure we get those nice loops on our hook. And then we yarn over and pull through those 2 loops. There. So you can see right away, even though I'm coming off of a hand crocheted stitch here, that hand crochet stitch is a pretty good size bigger than the one I made with the hook. But it really is the exact same motion. So if you can crochet, you just gotta kind of pretend your hand's a hook. If you would like to take this class and then learn to crochet, you just get the hook in there instead. So talking about size, I wanted to go over a couple of other things. I understand, you know, we all like to plan out our projects, and sometimes just chaining a length and then starting crocheting isn't going to work. You might want to know exactly how many stitches to start out with. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that for me, when I used this yarn with a chain of 16, skipping the chain closest to the hook so that I've got 16 single crochets for the width I ended up with a 36-inch width blanket. When I worked 18 rows, it ended up being 36 inches long. That may differ for you because of the size of your hand, but if we want to start with that as a guideline, we know we get 36 inches when we make 16 stitches. Now, what if we wanted to make a throw size? Your average kind of blanket for a couch or a throw, a nice gifting size, is about 50 inches wide. This is great for a lap blanket or a baby blanket, but for a throw, you want about 50 inches wide. So how do we figure out how many stitches we need to make a 50-inch wide blanket? Well, we do a little cross multiplication and division. Don't know exactly the theory of it. I'm not a math teacher, I'm a crocheter, but I know that this is how it works. We multiply across 16 stitches times 50. So I've got that right here, and that equals 800. So 16 times 50 is 800. Then we divide it by the 36. That gives us 22.22. So that means if we wanted a blanket that was 50 inches wide, we would want to make it with 22.22 stitches. Well, that doesn't really work, does it? So we have to make a decision. We could either do 22 stitches or we could do 23 stitches. If we do 22, it's going to be a little bit smaller. If we do 23, it's going to be a little bit wider. Well, for blankets, I personally always like to make them just a little bit wider. So I would err on the side of going for 23 stitches. But to make 23 stitches, that means we need to make 24 chains because we're always going to skip that chain that is closest to the hook. So hopefully that little math section there makes sense. Again, like I say, I'm not a math teacher. I can't really explain the theory of exactly why it works and why proportions and ratios work. I just know that they do. So then that brings us to planning out the amount of yarn you need. Well, to make a 36-inch by 36-inch blanket, for me, that took 4 balls of yarn. Again, your mileage may differ. These are just some guidelines to help you get started. 36 inches times 36 inches is 1,296 inches. This is our inches squared. That gives us our square inches for the blanket. So I know that I got that many square inches by using 4 balls. So I can get 324 square inches per ball. So let's say we wanted to make that blanket 50 inches by 50 inches. That would be 2,500 square inches. I know I can get 324 square inches per ball. So I take 2,500 divided by 324, and I find out that I need 7.7 balls, which means I would need to buy 8 balls of yarn. And that's a great point right there. You always want to err on the side of getting a little bit more. There's nothing worse than coming up with those, 10 stitches left to finish the whole blanket and now you're out of yarn. So I always recommend you pick up an extra one. If you don't like storing yarn or have extra yarn around, hold on to your receipt, but always err on having a little bit extra. So Bianca, did we have any questions about the math? I wanted to move on to showing how to join the yarn. I'm sure we're going to get some questions about that as well.
Yeah, I think we seem to be pretty good to move on. Just reviewing the last couple of messages here. Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay, great. Yeah, like I say, I'm sorry. I hope that made sense. I'm not a math teacher as such. I just know, I know it works. Can't exactly tell you why. So let's bring back up our yarn here. And let's say we are making one of these big blankets or some sort of project, any sort of project with this. And now it's time to add a new skein. We've come to the end of this one. What on earth are we going to do? Well, that's what I'm going to show you right now. I did see a question pop up here while I cut this yarn asking, Grandma used to have me roll her yarn into a ball for her. Should I do that with this one? I would be willing to bet your grandma was probably using yarn that was hanked, which did need to be rolled into a ball. The great thing about this yarn is you can just pull it right from the outside. It's basically already balled up for you. So let's come back to our project here. So what happens when we get, when it's time to add a new yarn, or maybe when we're at the end and we've got this loop? If we're at the end and we're completely done, we can just go ahead and pull that yarn end right through that loop, and that will tighten it right up. It'll finish it off and secure it, just like that. Then we just need to secure this end, or we need to add a new skein of yarn. Same technique either way. This is going to be something a little different. For this, we're going to bring in some sewing thread and a sewing needle. Now, normally I would choose thread that matched my yarn really well, but for today, for demonstration purposes, I wanted to use one a little more contrasting, so it's a little bit easier to see. And so you'll see how well the thread really does get hidden when you sew this yarn together. So this is just a needle threader that I happen to have because I didn't want you to have to watch me spend 15 minutes threading my needle instead of having class. There we are. So I will get my yarn on my sewing needle here. And this is a sewing needle. It's a lot sharper and smaller than a yarn needle. That said, you'd be hard pressed, I think, to find very many yarn needles big enough for that sort of yarn. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut my thread. You can see here I've got the two ends of the thread together, hopefully. There we are. And I'm going to go ahead and tie these ends together. I'm just going to put that knot in here a couple times. This is the same thing as if you were sewing on a button or making a small repair in a garment. We just want to get a knot here at the end of our thread so it doesn't pull all the way through. So that means I usually like to put a couple of knots right on top of each other. There we are. Okay, so then I will go ahead and trim up right there. I'm just going to trim it up close to the knot. Not right up next to it. I don't want the knot to come out, but I also don't want those little bits of thread sticking out. So then what I'm going to do is, if this was the end of the blanket and I just wanted to tack this one down, I mean, I would have worked all the way across, of course, but all I would do is pull that end down and sort of hold it up next to another piece of yarn to do this. If I wanted to add another skein, because I wanted to keep going with my project, I would pull up my next skein, whether it's the same color or a different color, and I'm just going to overlap those ends a little bit. Maybe by an inch, maybe half an inch or so, whatever feels good to you. You can see you can just pinch those together. If you haven't looked at this yarn up close yet, you can see just how incredibly squishy and soft it is. This is what's called a chenille style yarn. So although you can't really see it, you can feel it if you get a hold of it in person. There's a little core inside there, and then all these fuzzies are basically secured really well inside there. So what we're going to be doing is just putting these yarn ends together, and then we're going to start sewing right through. So I'm just going to take my needle and send it right through both of those layers. Now, to make it extra secure, what I like to do, and again, normally I would be doing this in a matching yarn, but it's a little easier to see if I don't. I'm going to pull it almost all the way through here. I don't know if you can see right there, that little knot still hanging out. And I'm going to send the yarn back through the other direction. There we are. And carefully start pulling it through. And then before I pull it all the way through, I want to send my needle right in between those strands of thread, which sometimes easier said than done. There we go. So now it's through those ends. So you can see as I pull it through, it'll catch on that knot, and the knot won't be able to pull all the way back through our yarn. And if I give that a real good strong tug, remember sewing thread is actually fairly strong, especially compared to some yarns, you can see already, you can't see that. It really goes down there into the core. So I wouldn't do it with just one stitch. I would take several stitches and just sew right through. Oop, I got right into the core. You don't want to try and sew into the core. That'll stop you. But you want to sew sort of around it. And just sew back and forth, changing the angles a few times to really help secure the ends of this yarn together. So like I said, this is a great way if you want to add another skein, if you are continuing on with your project, more than one skein to your project, especially if they're the same color, you can just sew these ends together. You can see it really is quite tight. Getting a little bit of fuzzing from where I cut it, but here as I sew these together, they really are quite secure. So then when I get to the end, when I feel like, okay, that feels like it's going to stay really well for me, I just go ahead and put a few more knots in it and trim it off. So let me do that here so I can hold it up. You can see just how well that blue thread really disappeared in this orange yarn. There we are. So I will just trim this one off here close to the yarn. There we are. So I didn't get it super close, but you can see just that very little ends right there. So if this was in a matching color of thread, I really wouldn't be able to see that at all. It's really just disappears right in there. And I like using this method better than using a knot. As you can imagine with this yarn, if I take this tail end here, if we put a knot in that yarn, it's going to be a great big knot. You know, that's not going to be hiding inside your project. If you're familiar with crocheting or knitting and you've woven in your ends before, as you can imagine, this is just going to be that kind of lumpy. It's just so thick. It's just such a thick yarn. It's what makes it luscious and gorgeous and beautiful, but it does make the ends take just that little bit of extra care. So like I say, if we weren't continuing on with a new skein, I would simply have taken that end and held it down here and maybe sewed it down inside that stitch a little bit and then trimmed it off to be closer to our project. So Bianca, we've got just a few minutes left here. Are there any specific questions I can answer? Any techniques I can show again?
Let's see here. Just really loving that sewing tip about having the stitch go through the thread, so you're not kind of getting it pulled through your yarn. That's a new tip for me, so I was taking notes. Let's see. So Julia's wondering, can we use a smaller yarn, like a size 5 or 6?
Absolutely. If you're using a much thinner yarn, you may want to switch to a hook, like I say, or try it with only 2 fingers or even with only 1 finger. I did make a blanket using this exact same technique with Bernat Blanket Extra, which I have, or I had near me somewhere earlier today. Here we are. This is Bernat Blanket Extra. And as you can see, this one is significantly thinner than Big. But I have found that you can do the same technique if you have the Bernat Blanket Extra, and I like to hold 3 of these together to get the width to make the hand crocheted blanket for this one. So for the extra, I like to use 3 of them held together. Extra thick or big, I would think would work equally well. However, 1 strand by itself.
Awesome. Do you have maybe the completed throw handy?
Yes, absolutely. We'll have to come back to the not overhand camera for that, I think. Otherwise, it's just a close-up again, unless that's what you wanted to see. Okay, let me move that. Oh, it's squealing for spooky season. I keep saying it's my camera is taken on a creak for Halloween. But here we go. Here is the finished one. This is one is 36 inches by 36 inches, and it took 4 balls of the Big. So right there is the finished one. And you can see the stitches here are a bit tighter. Once you are making these stitches at speed and you get really comfortable with them, like I say, your own personal gauge will really determine how many stitches you have for width and rows. You can see, turn it around here. There, and it's all just single crochet stitches. If there are, I saw we had a couple experienced crocheters in the group. So I know last time I got a question, can you make other stitches with your hands? And absolutely. If you know how to make half double crochet stitches and double crochet stitches, it's the same technique. You've just got to do a yarn over before you insert your hand, in the cave or in the hole where we put our hand in to make that next stitch. So any other questions I can get in here in those last 5 minutes?
Awesome. Melinda's wondering, will you be doing any other classes online with Michaels in the future?
Absolutely. I believe I have one coming up October 19th. This is off the top of my head. Trying to think if I still have my note down here from this morning. Let me double check because I actually had it written down for a live I did this morning. Yes, October 19th at 6 p.m. I will be teaching how to make front and back post stitches. That time it will be with a hook. I think we could do it with our hands, but that's getting pretty complicated. And I usually have a couple every month. And one thing I will say is I do try to, when I teach a class, this one I might not, just because I have taught this one several times for Michaels. So like I say, if this class confused you, maybe going back and watching one of the other ones that's already up might have the question, the answer that you're looking for. But I do also try to get my classes up on my website after they're up on the YouTube channel, and I will put all the links and things together with them. So I try and kind of make it really convenient from that end as well.
Awesome.
So. Thank you, Miriam. Sorry, I just saw Miriam popped up with a question. I can take this one. This is the Cosmos cardigan. It is made with Huga Charm, and it is a free pattern on mooglyblog.com. I think it's pretty simple. It was probably one of the very first sweaters that I designed. So definitely on the simpler side in terms of the actual design. And yeah, thank you. It's one of my favorite sweaters. Again, that's called the Cosmos cardigan, and it is free on mooglyblog.com, and it uses Red Heart Hygge Charm. And it comes in sizes, I believe, extra small through 5X. Might just be small through 5X. Don't know if I can get a link here quick enough on my little computer, but
Just drop the link in the chat.
thank you. Cosmos.com or Cosmos cardigan Moogly in Google ought to find it. Are there any other questions I can handle? And yes, there are video tutorials for the cardigan up both right and left-handed. It's the one thing, technology-wise, when it's pre-recorded, I can do left-handed. Unfortunately, live, I've tried. It does not go well. I cannot crochet left-handed live. And then it looks like I saw quite a few questions pop up about variegated yarns. Variegated yarns, unfortunately, they're lovely, but they do make it very difficult to learn just because it makes it harder to see what the stitch anatomy, basically. So if you are just learning, I recommend, if you can, that you use a solid colored yarn to learn with. I don't have any examples of it in a variegated, again, just in the solids. And then I did see one other question about finishing it off. I did show that really quickly right there before I sewed the ends together. Basically, you've got that last live loop that was on your fingers or on your hook, and you take the end of your yarn, cut it off if you need to, or if the end of your skein, you just pull that end right through that active loop, and it secures it right there so that it won't come back out. And then, of course, you need to sew down that end so it doesn't sneak back out later. But you just pull that end of your yarn up through the loop that was on your fingers, and it will secure at the end of the blanket or halfway through the blanket if you want to add a new skein that way too. So anything else?
Joni's wondering how long it took you to make the 36 by 36 throw.
That one took me, once I, determined the number of stitches and everything and got that part all laid out, it only took me about 3 hours, probably a bit less. I didn't realize it was going to go that fast, or I would have probably tried to actually time it out. But it only took me about 3 hours to make that one, once I'd had some practice with the technique. It wasn't the first time I had hand crocheted. So the first time I hand crocheted took me a lot longer. For washing, this yarn is officially machine wash and dry. So you could machine wash or dry your yarn, your finished blanket. Just make sure you've sewn down those ends really well. Otherwise, they might try and come out. The video is usually available within 24 hours, maybe 48 at the outside. Any other questions I can handle before we go here, Bianca?
I think that's it.
Okay. I was like, we're down to the last minute, maybe one more. But thank you all so much. Let me hold up that finished blanket again. Again, I know this is a new technique for a lot of people, for sure. If you've never crocheted before, that was a lot of information. So definitely go back and watch the recording and use that gear icon. Speed it up, slow it down. I have to do it when I watch other people's tutorials so I can learn something new. That's how I know about it. It's a great tool. So here is our finished blanket again, featuring Bernat Blanket Big. And yeah, which you can get right at Michael's, and you can watch the video here on the Michael's YouTube channel. So thank you so much for joining me tonight, and I hope you have a great evening. Okay, anything you need to say, Bianca?
No, I think you've covered it. Thanks so much.
All right, great. I just want to make sure I didn't cut you off. All right, have a great night, everybody, and I'll see you again soon.